Hi guys, welcome to another video. This time I will be talking about my new album Hypnagogia and how I made it. The album is out now, so you can check the description for a link to Bandcamp where you can find it along with my other music. And yeah, this has been a long time coming. This album was actually written already 2 years ago, and it was written in our old flat, and that explains probably why it hasn't come out earlier. Because if you've been following my channel, then you know that my old flat was a complete disaster with construction noise all the time, and this album was written under very difficult circumstances. And I think my most useful tool writing this album were my noise cancelling headphones, because it was just drilling, hammering, sledgehammering. Jesus, it was such a difficult thing to do. Already the tracking was quite difficult because of all this noise, and then when the album was done, I couldn't really finish it. I couldn't really mix and master it, because after you've had a whole day of, construction noise the whole time, drilling, hammering, your ears are just fried. So I just didn't manage to get around to mixing and mastering, and it's been sitting on my hard drive ever since. We then moved house to this new place where I have my nice new studio, but it took me a long time to finish this studio too. I had about more than half a year where I didn't have a studio or a place to record. My computer was packed up, I didn't even set it up yet, and I just couldn't mix and master either. It took a long time to get there finally, to finish this all off, but now it's finally done, and I'm so glad it's finally finished. So how did I actually write this album? This album wasn't written on the modular because I hadn't finished that yet. I wrote only one track with the Crave and my eerie modular, and that was basically it. The rest was done in the box with plugins. I also didn't record any other instruments. On my first album, Endless Nights, I used guitar and kalimba and steel tongue drum and that sort of thing, and recorded outside instruments into the box and then wrote tracks around it. But given the circumstances of construction mayhem, recording stuff from the outside wasn't really an option. So it was all done in the box with plugins. And I also used my Novation Launchpad Pro Mark III, which I had then just about a year or something like that. I hadn't really used it much to write finished tracks. I used the Launchpad and the Session View on Ableton, but I hadn't really used any of the other modes to write melodies or stuff like that. This was the first album where I did that. I wanted to try out the chord mode and be a bit more intentional about music theory and that sort of thing. With Endless Nights, I had mostly extracted harmonies and not really cared all that much about theory. I was just doing it intuitively. I had some early music theory lessons when I was a child, so there is some intuitive sense that I have of music theory, and I use that a lot. But with this album I wanted to be more focused on it. The reason was that I felt very much not in control of my situation because of all the noise, and we couldn't find another place to move to, and it just felt like with the pandemic and everything, that everything was just up in the air and I couldn't really control anything anymore. And controlling the melodies a bit more felt like I was gaining back some control. It's an illusion, but that was kind of the motivation behind it. The Launchpad actually made it very easy to write the melodies and also the chord progressions and all of that. It felt like the music itself was coming together quite easily in comparison to before, when I was doing it more randomly and not as focused. But everything else was such a difficulty that it still felt like I was struggling a lot. I actually wrote this album quite quickly, in just about a month, a bit more maybe, and I couldn't really record the process much because it was just too loud and obnoxious. I was just writing music and it was very focused, and no cameras, and it helped in many ways. instruments that I used were also very reduced in many ways. I wanted to focus on a few plugins only, and I used one of my all-time favorites, which is Pure Magnetic Verve. This is a tape loop simulation, basically. Whether it sounds like tape loops is anyone's best guess. It depends what you record on a tape loop, right? But it sounds very nice for what it is. I just really like the sound of that synth voice, basically. And the crackle and the bake is a bit too pronounced for my liking, so I usually turn it down and then improve it a bit with wires, which is a Heinbach plugin. I use wires to degrade it a bit and use it for a bit of warble and, a sort of effect like that. The advantage of using something like that is that it sounds like tape loops, but it's not quite as out of control as when you're recording actual loops. That might not always work the way you expect, and my tape recorders are often a bit broken, so they often degrade the sound a bit too much. So using a simulation is a bit more of a dialed back version of it, and I like that quite a lot. Another instrument that I used was Heinbach's plugin Landfill Totems. That was pretty new back then. It's a sample library where he sampled his test equipment, and since back then I didn't really have any space to have much gear in the sense of hardware, I couldn't really use something like that or even begin to think about something like that. So having the sample library was very inspiring and interesting. Of course, the workflow is very different, and it's not like using hardware at all, it's just a sample library. But I did find it very inspiring. And there's one sound that I really love in it, which is the beauty oscillator. And I think that sound alone is already worth the price of admission. That alone would be a reason to buy the sample library. I really like that one. But there are all these clicky sounds and interesting breaking down oscillators, and it's all very inspiring, and I really enjoyed using this as a sort of starting off point, just taking a sound and playing something with it and seeing where that leads me for the other elements. There's only one more instrument that I used, which was Ableton's Operator, and that's basically an FM synth engine that has tons of interesting presets. I don't really have that much experience programming FM sounds, so I relied on presets and changing them, really, because if you've ever even looked at the interface of a DX7, it's like, I don't know, it's somewhat complicated and involved, and I've been meaning to learn a bit more about it, but I haven't yet gotten around to it, and 2 years ago I had even less of a clue, so I only adjusted presets to my liking and took sounds from there. I normally use FM for bell-like sounds, and it's very good for that sort of thing. The effects were also rather reduced. There was, as I say, the wires, which was used for degrading sounds, but I also used Phantoms, which is another pure magnetic plugin. It's a more atmospheric type thing that mangles the sound quite a bit. And personally, I'm absolutely in love with the combination of Verve and Phantoms. You route one into the other and it's just pure gold. I would say that's, my version of rings into clouds is Verve into Phantoms. I just love that sound and it's just really lovely. With effects like that, I try to keep it very restrained because they can take over the sound spectrum quite a bit. So you have to be a bit more careful, and I use it just to enhance other sounds rather than having it play a central role. I really like it for that though, and it's something that I do quite a bit when I don't know where to take a track. I might just take one of the elements and plug it into Phantoms and see where that gets me. Sometimes it will spark some new variation of a melody and I take it off again, but oftentimes I leave it in and just use it as a sort of mellow effect. There was another Heinbach plugin that I used, which is called Things Motor, And it's basically a sort of crossfader that uses an LFO or sample and hold to crossfade between two signals. You have it running on the track and feed another signal into the sidechain, and then it switches between the two signals in like a sine wave or randomly, and I personally use it with sine waves most often. And this helps when you want to crossfade between things at a more steady rate or at a faster rate than you would want to if you were recording automation. Normally I do record automation with the Launch Control XL. The way I write my tracks is that I come to an arrangement in session view with clips and loops and that sort of thing, and then I play it in live with the Launchpad and the Launch Control XL, which I use as a mixer and to bring in effects sometimes. I also use one of my typical tricks, which is a very, very cheap, as in free, shimmer effect. You just take a free pitch shifter plugin and plug it into a reverb, something with long tails, and you will have a very nice shimmer. And it doesn't matter if the pitch shifter doesn't sound so great, it doesn't matter if the reverb is not that great. If you plug it together, it will sound like a very nice shimmer. I personally use pitch proof for the pitch shifter. On its own, it doesn't really convince me, but for this effect it's perfect. And for the reverb, I use something called Guitar Gadgets, and there's one module in it that's called Niagara Falls, and that has a long tail reverb. Especially if you push the effect up a bit, then it sounds just lovely, and that's a lush thing that I like to put on my tracks. And it is extremely economical, being free and all. I also used Valhalla Supermassive for reverbs, which is also free, and even the Verve and the Fathoms I actually got for free because they were at some point included with my audio interface, and that means lots of free plugins were used in this, or things that came with Ableton. For delays, I basically used Ableton's delays. On the track where I used the Crave, I used the AE modular delay, which is a sort of lo-fi effect with that PT2399 chip, and that's very common. I also have a guitar pedal that uses the same chip, and it's very nice for DIY stuff. It's simple. Even though it is a digital chip, it sounds quite analog and degraded, and I kind of like that, so I use that quite a bit. But on this album, it was only on this one track that I've made with the Crave, and the rest was just, Ableton standard delay, and that can definitely be enough, especially in ping pong mode. I like it quite a bit. The only real world effects that I used on this album are basically tape effects. I used the tape simulation, and I used the Soviet bar recorder plugin that Heinbach made, and that's already quite tapey. And I also used Isotope's vinyl for a bit of crackle every now and then, but not on every track, it's just on one, I believe. And I do like degrading my sounds a little bit, so I used proper tape for that if I wanted it properly extreme. There's one track with the working title Tape Loop Weirdness, and I cannot for the life of me remember how I made it. I assumed that I recorded something out of VCV Rack because that's what it sounds like to me, but I cannot be sure. And it was definitely a tape loop, and yeah, I definitely used proper tape loops for this one too, not just the simulation. And for one track I also used a micro cassette recorder that was on its way out. It was basically the last track this recorder ever gave me. It was the end of this recorder. Now it doesn't play anymore. I don't know why. I've tried to repair it and I haven't really found what's wrong with it yet. But I used this to degrade one of the sounds, and for this I recorded the melody with effects into the microcassette and then re-recorded it again from there and into the microcassette again, and the second time round it was very spooky and creepy. And that was exactly what I wanted. That is the title track of this album, and I think it turned out amazing. It has this sort of Caretaker vibe. That track was definitely inspired by the Caretaker and his wonderful music. He does this really cool thing where he takes old Ballroom 78's records and takes melodies from that and degrades them until it sounds completely eerie and spooky. It's kind of this hauntology type thing, and I really like that sort of music. I wanted to do something similar with my own melody, to degrade it until it becomes something very eerie and spooky. And that's definitely an effect that I will be using again at some point. So there was some real world stuff in there, but not an awful lot, and much less than in my first album, which was much more, guitar, kalimba, that sort of thing. And this one is more synth based, basically. And in a way it turned out more cohesive because of that too. I think a lot of people, if they were to try and list all the effects that they use on an album or even on a single track, it might get quite out of hand, but I like to keep things a little bit more reduced, and I don't use that much. And if you only use few instruments, you get a sort of cohesive effect that is quite nice when you're writing an album, because that then means that the entire album feels like it is one, and not just random tracks that are, shoved together and sort of fit together because they are sort of in the same style. If you just use the same instruments, it's gonna be much more cohesive and fit together much more nicely. If you've listened to my first album, Endless Nights, then you will probably realize with Hypnagogia that it is a bit darker than the first one. About half of it is still very much light and ambient, but it sort of descends into a more dark ambient style towards the end. And this is actually unsurprising, because I used to make only dark ambient many years ago. I started out making dark ambient, that's where my roots are. I only started making lighter ambient when I was writing the background music for my YouTube channel. I was making mainly photography videos. Whenever I put the darker tracks on my videos, I got these comments that basically told me to stop creeping people out with my music. So I started making lighter music too, and I do make a lot of lighter tracks now, but my normal mode, basically, my standard falling back into my usual style, is going back into the dark ambient, and I have to make a conscious effort not to make my tracks too dark. And with about half of the tracks, I didn't really manage in this album because I was just in such a bad mood because of everything that was going on, and I was just going with the flow of whatever my day felt like. Only that, after the pandemic started, it felt like all my days were a specific type of mood, and it wasn't a good one. That's because I'm risk group, and for me the pandemic was quite a bit more scary than for other people, I suppose. And it still has effects on me now, and it still restricts what I can do and what I can't do. And that basically had a very strong impact on this album and the mood of this album specifically.
By October, when cases were rising again, the diaries reveal a Prime Minister oscillating from one position to another over a second lockdown. Writing PM meeting, he begins to argue for letting it all rip, saying yes, there'll be more casualties, but so be it. They've had a good innings. DC, Dominic Cummings, says Rishi thinks just let people die and that's okay. 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 Just let people
I imagine this album as a sort of journey where you go for a walk in the woods. It starts out sort of light and nice and nature, and you feel, it's quite awe-inspiring and that sort of thing. And then you go deeper and deeper into the woods, and you get a bit lost and you get a bit confused, and then maybe it's not quite as nice anymore, and maybe there are wolves and something is hunting you, and I hope you like it anyway. I really find those darker tracks quite inspiring and interesting, and I love the sound world that you can find in the darker ambient, scenery basically. And I really love that, but I know it's not everyone's cup of tea, and if you're used to my lighter tracks, maybe it can be a bit too much. I don't know. It really depends on your type of style, whether you like that sort of thing or not. For me, it's basically the sweet spot is somewhere in the middle between dark and light, atmospheric, moody in a lighter mood, or melodic and interesting with bells in a darker mood. I try to be somewhere in the middle most of the time, I guess, and that's, neither fish nor meat, basically. If you want to categorize my music, ambient, dark ambient, I don't know. Sometimes it's one thing, sometimes it's another, and that's very nice in a way, because it leaves me a space to explore and to push myself in uncomfortable regions. And the funny thing is that where it becomes difficult for me and more challenging to make is when I have to make it a bit lighter for background music and that sort of thing. My normal mode is basically to hang out in the dark spaces, and that's just how I am. And it is sort of fitting to record this video with rain and wind pelting this attic, because, well, the album is also a bit like that. As you might know, I'm actually a photographer, so I tend to do all my own album art. In this case, I used a picture from a project that I've been working on for a while, and I go into the woods for this, and I use all my strangest cameras. I have this Brownie where I flip the lens, and it makes these very eerie looking pictures, and I thought it was perfect for this album cover. Normally I don't edit my work very heavily, because I'm primarily a documentary photographer, but in this case for album covers I tend to go quite heavy on the Photoshop, and this has been a style of mine for a very long time, so I tend to fall back into it. In this case I used textures that I had flying about from other pictures that I took with my medium format cameras, and I also used a texture that I had from way back in 2012 when I was still using a digital camera, and I combined those with other pictures I took. And all the album art and the liner notes has always at least one or two elements of mine that were textures of mine or pictures of mine, and I layer that with things that I find on Unsplash sometimes, and create these rather heavy edits that look like double exposures. But more about that soon in another video. I'm quite happy with how this turned out, and I thought the mood was very fitting for the music. So if you enjoyed what you heard in this video, then you can check out the album in the description. There's a link to Bandcamp, and there you can also find the first album if you're interested in my more lighter music. So do check it out if you feel like it, and I hope you enjoy it. It's been a long time coming, and I know a lot of you have been waiting for this one. I had many comments asking for more music, but I just had this absolute nightmarish living situation where it was impossible to mix and master this album until now. If you enjoyed this video, then please leave a like and subscribe if you haven't done so already. It really helps out my channel, so I would appreciate it. You can also support my channel on Ko-fi. There are different tiers where you can download my music, for example, or just get early access to my videos and that sort of thing. And there will be more stuff coming in the future. I think I will have a tier with sample packs and that sort of thing at some point, so do check it out if you're interested in seeing more of these kinds of videos, because the Ko-fi definitely helps to keep this channel running. In the future you can expect more videos like this one, because I actually have several albums already written that just need mixing and mastering. I have one completely finished. I'm in the process of writing another one, and I will be showing you the process of writing that one soon. I actually started with that one already, and there will be videos coming about that. There will be more stuff like this coming, more music content definitely. So I hope I see you soon for another video. Bye!